The bullet tore through Clara Nelson's side as she ran, her boots slipping on wet grass, the bank's stolen documents clutched against her bleeding ribs. Behind her, gunshots cracked the Wyoming twilight. She had trusted the wrong man, her boss, her almost fiancé, and now his hired killers wanted her dead along with the truth she carried. When darkness swallowed her by the creek, one thought flickered. I won't make it through the night. But fate had other plans. Stay with us until the end and comment what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The Wyoming Territory stretched endless and unforgiving under the amber wash of late September sun, 1875. Redemption Creek sat nestled in a valley where the Bighorn Mountains cast their long shadows, a town of modest ambitions, 2 saloons, 1 church, a general store, and the first bank of Redemption Creek, which had opened its doors just 3 years prior with considerable fanfare and cautious optimism. Inside that bank, on the morning everything changed, Clara Nelson stood behind the teller's window counting currency with practiced fingers. At 24, she was the first and only female bank teller in the entire territory, a fact that generated equal parts admiration and scandal among the town's 1,100 residents. Her chestnut hair was pinned in a sensible bun, her navy dress buttoned to the collar, her green eyes sharp with intelligence that made certain men uncomfortable and others foolishly hopeful. "Morning, Miss Nelson," old Jeremiah Cole wheezed as he approached her window, hat in weathered hands. "Need to withdraw $8 for seed, if you please." "Of course, Mr. Cole." Clara's smile came easily, genuinely. She knew every account holder by name, knew whose farm struggled through drought, whose children had married, whose sons never returned from the war. "How's Martha's rheumatism? Acting up something fierce with this weather turning." He shook his head. "Says we're in for an early winter." "Martha's knees are more reliable than any almanac," Clara agreed, counting out his money. "Give her my best." Behind her, in the office with frosted glass windows, Edward Palmer shuffled papers with theatrical importance. Bank manager, son of Boston money, educated at Harvard, and possessor of political ambitions that stretched all the way to the territorial legislature. He was also, as of 3 months ago, Clara's determined suitor, a courtship she had neither particularly encouraged nor firmly discouraged, a careful dance that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Edward was handsome in the way of men who'd never done hard labor, soft hands, carefully groomed mustache, suits that cost more than most families earned in half a year. He treated Clara with elaborate courtesy that felt more like ownership rehearsal than genuine affection. But he was educated, respectable, and represented a kind of security that frontier women were supposed to want. "You're too good for this work," he'd told her just yesterday, standing too close in the vault. "A woman of your quality should be running a household, raising children, hosting dinners for people who matter." "I like working," she'd replied, stepping past him. "I'm good at it." "You're good at everything." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's precisely why you shouldn't waste yourself on this." She hadn't answered. Something in his tone had made her skin prickle with warning she couldn't quite name. Now, as the morning sun climbed higher and Redemption Creek went about its ordinary business, Clara processed deposits and withdrawals, recorded transactions in her meticulous hand, and tried to ignore the growing unease that had shadowed her for weeks. Edward had been acting strangely, taking private meetings with rough-looking men, making unexplained trips to Cheyenne, spending long hours in the vault with the books. She'd accidentally seen some of his ledger work 2 weeks ago. The numbers hadn't made sense, deposits recorded but not reflected in the accounts, withdrawals that appeared in official records but not in the daily logs. When she'd mentioned the discrepancies, Edward had smiled that cold smile and told her she must have been mistaken, that banking was complicated, that she shouldn't worry her pretty head about things above her understanding. That's when Clara had started making copies. Late at night, when Edward left her alone to lock up, she'd carefully transcribed the suspicious entries. She'd matched them against depositor accounts. And slowly, sickeningly, a pattern had emerged. Edward Palmer, respectable banker and Boston gentleman, was stealing from the people of Redemption Creek. Thousands of dollars siphoned away through false entries and fraudulent loans, money that hardworking families had saved for years disappearing into accounts that existed only on paper. She'd kept the evidence hidden in her rented room, uncertain what to do. Who would believe her? Edward was respected, connected, trusted. She was just the girl who counted money, the odd duck who'd rather work than marry. And if she was wrong, if there was some explanation she didn't understand, she'd lose everything. Her position, her reputation, her independence. But this morning, she'd decided. She would take the evidence to Marshal Hawkins after work. He was honest, fair, and most importantly, he owed the Palmers nothing. If there was legitimate explanation, he'd find it. If there wasn't, the law would handle it. The decision had brought relief and terror in equal measure. At 11:30, the bank was moderately busy. Besides Clara and Edward, there was Thomas Winters, the senior teller, and Milton Reed, the guard who usually spent more time napping than guarding. 6 customers conducted business in the comfortable lobby with its polished wood and potted ferns, an oasis of Eastern civilization on the frontier. Clara was processing a deposit for Mrs. Calloway when the door crashed open. 4 men entered, and everything about them was wrong. Dusters caked with trail dust despite the dry weather, hats pulled low, bandanas around their necks, easily raised, and most damningly, the way their hands rested on their holstered weapons, relaxed but ready. The conversation died like a candle snuffed. "Bank's being robbed," the tallest one announced, almost casually. "Everybody stay calm. Nobody gets hurt." For a stretched second, nobody moved. Frontier robberies happened, but not here, not in Redemption Creek, where the closest thing to excitement was usually the 4th of July horse race. Then Milton Reed, jolted from whatever daydream occupied him, reached for his shotgun. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Milton dropped like a puppet with cut strings, blood blooming across his chest. Mrs. Calloway screamed. Mr. Henley, the blacksmith, started to move and froze when a revolver swung toward him. "Said nobody had to get hurt," the tall man repeated, voice hard now. "That means you don't play hero. Hands up, all of you, you behind the counter. Open the registers." Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Thomas Winters, pale as milk, fumbled with his cash drawer. Clara stood frozen, mind racing. The papers. The evidence. She'd brought it to work today, planning to slip away during her lunch hour. It was in her bag beneath the counter. And these men... "Miss Nelson." Edward's voice cut through her panic. He stood in his office doorway, and his face was wrong. No fear, no shock, just careful control. "Please do as they say." Something in his tone made her blood run cold. "Smart banker," the tall man said, and there was familiarity in it, an ease that spoke of prior arrangement. "Oh, God." "The vault," the man continued, "will need it opened." "Of course." Edward moved toward it, pulling keys from his vest. "Please don't hurt anyone else. Take what you want." He was too calm, too prepared, and when his eyes met Clara's, she saw the truth there plain as day. "I know you know. I know what you found." "Clara," he said her name like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Bring your bag and join me at the vault." Every instinct screamed trap. The other customers were being herded into a corner, hands raised, fear bright in their eyes. Thomas stood rooted behind his window, hands shaking. The dead guard's blood was spreading across the polished floor. "Now, Clara." She bent slowly, retrieving her bag, mind racing through impossible options. Run? They'd shoot her in the back like Milton. Comply? And what? Let them take the evidence, silence her, make it look like she died in the robbery, scream the truth in front of witnesses? Who would believe her, and how many others would die in the resulting chaos? Her fingers brushed her bag's clasp, felt the papers inside, proof of Edward's crimes, proof that might die with her in the next few minutes. "Clara, I won't ask again." She straightened, gripping the bag. Walked toward the vault on legs that felt carved from wood. Edward's smile was almost pitying as he pulled the heavy door open, revealing stacks of currency, deposit boxes, the bank's carefully guarded heart. "Inside," he said quietly. "We'll make it quick." One of the robbers, shorter, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, started filling a sack with money. Another watched the customers. The tall one, clearly the leader, moved close to Edward. "The girl's a problem," he muttered, voice low but not low enough. "I'll handle it," Edward replied. "Give me 5 minutes." Clara's knees nearly buckled. She looked at the man she'd almost convinced herself to marry, The man who'd spoken of protecting her, providing for her, giving her a good life. His eyes were flat, calculating, holding no more warmth than a snake's. "You're with them," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "This whole thing, the robbery, it's to cover the embezzlement, to destroy the records." "You always were too clever," Edward sighed like a disappointed teacher. "If you'd just accepted my proposal, none of this would be necessary. We could have been partners, Clara. I would have shared everything with you." "You're stealing from people who trust you." "I'm taking what I earned," his voice hardened. "Do you know what it's like being sent to this godforsaken territory? Managing accounts for shopkeepers and ranchers? I'm worth more than this. I deserve more." "So you steal their savings, their futures?" "I'm liberating capital that was doing nothing but sitting here." He stepped closer. "Give me the papers, Clara. The copies you made. I know you have them." She clutched the bag tighter. "And then what? You shoot me? Blame it on the robbery?" "I prefer not to, truly." And he almost sounded sincere. "Come with us. We'll stage your death, give you a new identity somewhere else. You're intelligent, beautiful. We can build something together once this business is settled." "You murdered Milton. He made a choice. I'm giving you better options." Behind them, in the bank lobby, one of the women was crying softly. Clara could hear Thomas hyperventilating. She thought about her father, who'd taught her numbers and encouraged her education despite the neighbors' disapproval. Her mother, who'd died when Clara was 12, whispering, "Be brave, be smart, be true." All the people who'd deposited their trust and money in this bank, believing it was safe. "No," she said. Edward's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I hoped you'd reconsider." "Boss?" The scarred robber leaned out from the vault. "We got what we came for." "Excellent." Edward pulled a derringer from his vest, small but deadly, at close range. "Clara, last chance. The papers and your cooperation, or—" She threw the bag at his face and ran. Not toward the lobby. That way held more guns, more death. Instead, she bolted for the back door, the employee entrance that led to the alley behind the bank. She heard Edward curse, heard the derringer's sharp crack, felt something tug at her skirt as the bullet passed too close. Her fingers found the door handle, twisted, and then she was outside in the autumn sunlight, running like she'd never run in her life. "Get her!" Edward's shout echoed. "She can't leave this town alive!" More gunshots. Wood splintered on the building beside her head. Clara tore down the alley, lifting her skirts, lungs already burning. Behind her, boots pounded. Ahead lay the main street, full of witnesses, but also full of Edward's friends, people who'd never believe her wild accusations against the respectable Mr. Palmer. She veered right, away from the street, toward the creek that gave the town its name. If she could reach the wilderness, the rocks and trees where horses couldn't easily follow. The bullet caught her left side like a fist made of fire. Clara gasped, stumbled, nearly went down. Her hand came away red when she touched her ribs. Not fatal, some distant clinical part of her mind assessed. Painful, bleeding, but the shot had carved a furrow rather than punching through. She could still move, still run. She had to. "I see her!" A shout behind her. "Heading for the creek!" The town gave way to scrub grass and scattered cottonwoods. Redemption Creek gurgled 20 yards ahead, swollen from recent rain in the mountains. Beyond it, the land rose toward pine forests and rocky hills, wild country where civilization's grip loosened. Clara crashed through brush, her carefully pinned hair coming loose, her practical dress catching on thorns. The pain in her side was spreading, a hot throb that matched her hammering pulse. Blood soaked through her dress, probably leaving a trail a child could follow. She splashed into the creek, gasping at the cold shock. The current pulled at her skirts, threatening her balance. She waded across, fell once, hauled herself up, and dragged herself onto the far bank. Behind her, voices shouted coordinates, strategies. How many were chasing her? All 4 robbers? Just some? Was Edward with them, or was he back at the bank, arranging his Alibaba with crocodile tears? The trees swallowed her. Pine needles carpeted the ground, muffling her footsteps. Clara pressed her hand to the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding, and pushed deeper into the forest. No plan now except survival. Get far enough away to hide, to rest, to think. The evidence was lost, still in her bag, probably in Edward's hands by now. But she was alive, and while she lived, she could testify, if anyone would believe her, if she didn't bleed out first. The afternoon sun slanted golden through the pines, beautiful and indifferent. Clara's vision swam. Her legs felt distant, uncertain. How much blood had she lost? Too much. Not enough to kill yet, but enough to weaken, to slow. She heard them behind her, crashing through brush, calling to each other. They had horses now. She'd heard the hoofbeats. She was on foot, wounded, in unfamiliar territory. The math was simple and cruel. A fallen log loomed ahead, massive and moss-covered. Clara crawled behind it, pressing herself into the space between dead wood and living earth. She made herself small, quiet, trying to control her ragged breathing. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the forest floor. The hoofbeats grew closer, stopped, lost the trail. A voice, maybe 30 yards away. "Blood stops here." "She's wounded. Can't have gone far." Another voice, harder. "Spread out. Check every tree, every rock. Boss wants this finished." What's so important about some bank girl anyway? She knows things, wrote things down. Now shut up and search. Clara closed her eyes, pressed harder against her wound. The evidence was gone, but if she lived, she could recreate it. She'd memorized most of the numbers, the dates, the fake accounts. Her testimony alone might not convict Edward, but it could start an investigation. If she lived? The pain was getting worse, or maybe she was just getting weaker. Her hand was slick with blood. Her dress was ruined. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she almost wanted to laugh at the absurdity, worried about her dress while bleeding out in the wilderness. "Nothing here." The voices were moving away, scanning a different section of forest. "Keep looking. She's close." But they were moving in the wrong direction, away from her hiding place. Luck, or divine intervention, or simple human error. Clara didn't care which. She waited, counting her heartbeats, until the sounds faded completely. Then she waited longer. When she finally moved, her body protested with waves of agony. The world tilted, steadied, tilted again. She needed help, medical attention, but going back to town meant walking into Edward's trap. The nearest ranch was where? Miles? In which direction? Clara oriented herself by the sun, sinking now toward the mountains. East would eventually take her toward Cheyenne, weeks away on foot. West led deeper into wilderness. North. North there were scattered homesteads, ranches, people who might help. If she could reach them. If she didn't collapse first. She started walking, one hand pressed to her side, the other grasping tree trunks for support. Every step was negotiation with gravity, with consciousness, with her body's insistent message that she should lie down, rest, surrender. "Be brave," her mother's voice whispered from memory. "Be smart, be true." Clara walked. The sun sank lower. Shadows lengthened into twilight. She crossed another creek, smaller than Redemption Creek, just a trickle between stones. Drank from cupped hands, the cold water shocking her slightly more alert. Kept walking. Her feet found a game trail, the earth packed hard by deer or elk. Easier than fighting through brush. She followed it north, guided by instinct and failing light. When she fell the first time, she got up. The second time, it took longer. The third time, her legs simply refused to work properly, folding beneath her like wet paper. Clara lay there on the game trail, staring up at the first stars emerging in a sky going purple with dusk. Beautiful. Her side throbbed with each heartbeat, the pain almost rhythmic now, almost familiar. She felt cold despite the lingering warmth of the day. This was how it ended then. Not in the bank, not with a bullet through the heart, but here in the quiet wilderness, bleeding slowly into the earth while stars watched indifferently. She thought of her father, of Thomas at the bank. Had they killed him too? Of Mrs. Calloway and the others, traumatized but hopefully alive. Of Edward Palmer, who would frame this whole disaster as a tragic robbery, himself the brave survivor, her the unfortunate victim. He'd get away with it, all of it. No. Clara said it aloud, her voice strange in the gathering darkness. She pressed her palms to the earth, pushed. Her body screamed. She screamed back at it, wordless and furious, and somehow got her knees under her. Crawled. Couldn't walk anymore, but she could crawl. hands and knees, inches at a time, dragging herself forward because stopping meant dying and dying meant Edward won. The game trail led downward toward the sound of running water. Another creek, larger than the last, rushing swift and cold. Clara collapsed at its edge, and this time she knew she wouldn't get up again. The stars reflected in the water's surface, dancing between rocks. She watched them blur and separate, her vision failing. Cold seeped through her dress into her bones. The pain in her side was fading, which she suspected was a bad sign. "Sorry," she whispered to no one. "I tried." And then there was only darkness, and the sound of water, and the slow fade of stars. Post. Gavin Callahan had been tracking the buck for 3 hours. It was a magnificent animal, 12 points at least, mature and cunning, the kind of deer that had survived multiple hunting seasons through sheer intelligence. Gavin had spotted it around dawn near the ridge above his property, and something about the challenge had called to him. His larder was already stocked for winter, his ranch work caught up enough for a day's hunting. He'd saddled his horse Smoke, packed his rifle, and set out with the sunrise. Now, as twilight approached, he was beginning to think the damn deer was smarter than him. At 31, Gavin had spent most of his adult life learning the Wyoming Territory's rhythms and moods. He'd come west after the war, one of thousands of veterans who couldn't go home, couldn't settle back into the lives they'd left. The war had carved things out of him that peace couldn't fill, so he'd kept moving until he'd found this land, these mountains, this solitude that asked no questions about what he'd seen or done. His ranch sat in a valley 15 miles north of Redemption Creek, far enough from town that neighbors were theoretical rather than actual. He raised horses, good stock that miners and ranchers paid well for, and kept to himself. People in town knew him as reliable, quiet, and completely uninterested in the social opportunities that frontier communities offered unattached men. They didn't know about the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, or the way his hands shook when thunder sounded too much like artillery, or the deep conviction that he'd used up all his relationship luck watching friends die in places like Shiloh and Gettysburg. Solitude suited him. Animals didn't ask about the war. Mountains didn't judge. And tracking a clever buck through autumn forest was complicated enough to occupy his mind without dredging up memories he'd rather leave buried. Smoke, his gray gelding, waited patiently tied to a pine while Gavin examined the ground. Fresh tracks, still damp at the edges. The buck had passed here recently, heading toward the creek. Gavin moved quietly, rifle ready but not raised. He wasn't particularly hungry for the kill. It was the chase itself that mattered, the skill and patience, the communion with wild things. His grandmother, who'd raised him after his parents died, used to say he had Indian blood somewhere back in the family tree. "You move like water," she'd told him, quiet and persistent. She'd taught him tracking, taught him the old remedies with herbs and roots, taught him to pay attention to what the land was saying. He missed her. Missed the way she'd made even silence feel like conversation. The buck's trail led downward, toward the sound of rushing water. Gavin followed, boots finding purchase on the slope, eyes scanning the shadows between trees. Twilight was tricky light for hunting, neither bright enough to see clearly nor dark enough to give up. The in-between time. He smelled blood before he saw it. Gavin froze, instincts from both war and wilderness sharpening instantly. Wrong blood. Not deer, not any animal he knew. Sweet and copper bright, human blood, recent and plentiful. His hand tightened on the rifle as he moved forward carefully. The smell strengthened, and then he saw the trail, dark droplets on pine needles, smears on tree bark, the unmistakable signs of someone wounded moving through the forest. "Hello?" His voice echoed strange in the quiet. "Anyone there? You hurt?" No answer, just the creek's constant murmur and the whisper of wind through pines. Gavin followed the blood trail downward. It grew heavier, more concentrated, speaking of injury worsening or strength failing. Whoever left this trail was in serious trouble. The creek appeared through the trees, swift and cold, with mountain runoff. The blood trail led right to its edge and stopped. At a crumpled shape that his mind initially rejected as human. Gavin ran. She lay half in the water, her dress dark with blood and creek water, her hair loose and tangled with leaves. Young, mid-20s maybe, her face pale as winter in the fading light, not breathing that he could see. "Ma'am?" He dropped to his knees beside her, fingers finding the pulse point at her throat. There, faint and thready, but there. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. He ran his hands carefully over her, checking for injuries, found the gunshot wound in her left side still seeping. The bullet had carved a furrow through flesh without, as far as he could tell, hitting anything immediately fatal. But she'd lost blood, been out in the elements, was hypothermic from the creek water. Without treatment, she'd be dead by midnight. Gavin made his decision in a heartbeat. He stripped off his coat, wrapped it around her, and lifted her as gently as he could. She weighed nothing, bird-boned and limp in his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder. "Got you," he murmured, more to himself than her. "You're safe now." He carried her up the slope to where Smoke waited. The horse snorted, smelling blood, but held steady as Gavin mounted awkwardly, the woman cradled in his arms. It would be slower going this way, harder on Smoke, but faster than walking and far faster than fetching a wagon. "Home, boy." Gavin touched his heels to Smoke's flanks. "Fast as you can without jostling." The gelding started moving, picking his way carefully through the darkening forest. Gavin held the woman close, trying to share his body heat, feeling her shallow breaths against his chest. Who was she? What had happened? The wound was clearly from a gunshot, recent enough that whoever had fired might still be looking for her. That meant trouble, complications, involvement in things Gavin had spent years avoiding. But he'd found her. That meant she was his responsibility now, at least until he could get her to safety, if he could keep her alive that long. The ride to his cabin took 45 minutes that felt like 45 hours. Full darkness fell, and he guided Smoke by memory and instinct, trusting the horse's knowledge of the terrain. The woman in his arms grew colder despite his coat, her breathing more shallow. Once he thought he felt her stir, heard a whispered sound that might have been words, but then she went still again. "Stay with me," Gavin said quietly. "Just a little longer. Stay with me." His cabin appeared as a dark shape against darker forest. He'd left the lamp burning low, a habit from living alone, coming home to darkness too reminiscent of nights that never really ended. Now that small glow felt like salvation. Gavin dismounted carefully, the woman still in his arms, and kicked the door open. The cabin was simple. One main room with a stone fireplace, a loft for sleeping, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. Pelts and herbs hung drying from the rafters, basic furniture he'd built himself. Home. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, and lit more lamps. In better light, he could assess properly. Young, as he'd thought. Pretty in an understated way that spoke of intelligence rather than decoration. Good quality dress, now ruined. Hands that showed work but not hard labor. Town woman, he guessed. Educated, with a job that involved paper rather than livestock. And shot by someone who'd meant business. Gavin had treated more gunshot wounds than he cared to count. War made medics of anyone who survived long enough. He fetched his grandmother's medicine box, herbs and salves and tinctures that worked better than half of what passed for modern medicine. Boiled water on the stove, cut away the blood-soaked dress without ceremony, revealing the wound. Ugly, but survivable if infection didn't set in. The bullet had gouged a channel through the flesh of her left side, missing, by what looked like providence or inches, anything vital. He cleaned it with boiled water and whiskey, packed it with a poultice his grandmother had taught him, wrapped it with clean bandages torn from an old sheet. The woman never woke, never moved, barely breathed. "Stay with me," Gavin murmured, repeating it like prayer or command. "You didn't come this far to die in a stranger's cabin. Stay with me." He covered her with blankets, built up the fire until the cabin was almost stifling, and pulled a chair beside the bed. Kept one hand on her wrist, monitoring her pulse. It stayed weak but steady, a small, stubborn drum that said her body wasn't ready to surrender yet. As the night deepened, Gavin kept his vigil. He changed the bandages when blood seeped through, applied cold compresses when fever flushed her skin, trickled water between her lips, and felt absurdly grateful when her throat worked to swallow. "That's it," he encouraged. "Keep fighting. Stay with me." Outside, owls called to each other across the darkness. Inside, lamplight pushed back shadows, And Gavin Callahan, who'd chosen isolation, who'd sworn off complications, found himself desperately invested in the survival of a woman whose name he didn't even know. Sometime past midnight, she began to tremble. Fever, breaking hard. He piled more blankets, held her shoulders when the shaking threatened to reopen her wound, spoke to her in the same voice he used for spooked horses. Low, constant, reassuring. "You're safe here. I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you. Stay with me. Just stay with me." The fever raged through the small hours. She muttered in her delirium fragments about banks and papers and someone named Edward who'd betrayed her. About running, about blood, about stars reflected in water. Her body fought battles Gavin couldn't see, and all he could do was cool her brow with wet cloth and repeat his useless, necessary words. "Stay with me." Near dawn, when the sky began its shift from black to gray, her trembling eased. The fever broke with a suddenness that left her sweat-soaked and limp. Gavin changed the sheets, cleaned her face, and checked the wound. No smell of infection yet. Bleeding stopped, pulse stronger. She might make it. He slumped in his chair, exhausted but unable to sleep. Who was she? What had happened in town? The fragments of her fever talk painted an ugly picture. Something about the bank, about theft, about someone hunting her. If she'd been fleeing when she was shot, the shooter might still be looking, which meant Gavin's cabin might not stay safe for long. But that was a problem for after sunrise. Right now, all that mattered was that she was breathing, warm, and alive. He'd kept her through the night. As the first birds began their morning chorus, Gavin finally stood, stretched his aching back, and looked down at the woman who'd become his unexpected responsibility. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "And what kind of trouble did you bring to my door?" She slept on, oblivious, her face peaceful in the aftermath of crisis. Gavin touched the wet cloth to her forehead once more and heard himself whisper again the words that had carried them both through the darkness. "Stay with me." Clara woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee, sensations so ordinary they felt like lies. Her body told a different story. Every muscle ached, her side burned with focused agony, and her mouth tasted like she'd been chewing copper pennies. She tried to move and immediately regretted it, a gasp escaping her lips. "Easy now." A man's voice, low and careful. "Don't tear those stitches." Her eyes flew open. She was in a cabin she didn't recognize, covered in quilts she'd never seen, and a stranger sat in a chair beside the bed watching her with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was maybe 30, weathered in the way of men who worked outdoors, with dark hair that needed cutting and a few days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He held a tin cup of coffee and regarded her with an expression somewhere between concern and wariness. Clara's hand went automatically to her side, found bandages wrapped tight beneath a shirt that wasn't hers. Memories crashed back. The bank, Edward's betrayal, running through the forest, the bullet tearing through her flesh, collapsing by the creek. She'd been certain she was dying. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a rasp. "My cabin. About 15 miles north of Redemption Creek." He set down his coffee, leaned forward slightly. "I'm Gavin Callahan. Found you yesterday evening by the water, half dead. Been touch and go through the night, but your fever broke near dawn." Yesterday evening, Clara tried to process. That meant she'd lost nearly 24 hours. "What day is it?" "Thursday, September 23rd. His eyes studied her face. "You remember what happened?" Did she remember? God, she'd never forget. Edward's cold smile as he pulled that derringer. The sound of Milton Reed hitting the floor, running for her life while bullets chased her into the wilderness. "The bank," she said. "There was a robbery. I was shot. Figured that much out." Gavin's expression didn't change. The how and why of it, though, that's your story to tell if you're willing. Clara assessed him carefully, every instinct on high alert despite her weakened state. He'd saved her life, clearly, but she didn't know this man. Didn't know if Edward had connections beyond town, allies who might be searching for her. Trust had nearly gotten her killed yesterday. "I need to get to Cheyenne," she said instead of answering. "To the territorial marshal. It's urgent." "You need to stay in that bed for at least 3 more days." His tone was firm but not unkind. "You lost a lot of blood. And that wound's going to fester if you don't give it time to start healing proper. Cheyenne's a week's ride in good conditions, longer if you're injured. You don't understand. I understand you got shot and came damn close to dying. Gavin stood, moved to the stove where a pot was simmering. I understand somebody's probably looking for you, which means staying put might be dangerous for both of us. But I also understand you won't make it 3 miles in your condition, let alone 3 days to Cheyenne. He ladled something that smelled like soup into a bowl, brought it to her. Clara tried to sit up, and the world spun sickeningly. Gavin's hand steadied her shoulder, helped her lean back against pillows he'd propped behind her. Slow, he instructed. Your body's been through hell. Everything's going to hurt for a while. The soup was venison and vegetables, simple but well made. Clara's stomach cramped with hunger she hadn't noticed until food appeared. She ate slowly, aware of Gavin watching her with that same careful assessment. Thank you, she said finally, for saving me. For this. Don't need thanks for doing what's decent. He settled back in his chair. But I do need to know what kind of trouble followed you into these mountains. If men are hunting you, I need to be prepared. Clara set down the bowl, her hands trembling slightly. Could she trust him? Every survival instinct said to keep quiet, to reveal nothing that might endanger her further. But this man had spent the night keeping her alive when he could have simply left her by the creek. He deserved some truth. My name is Clara Nelson. I was a teller at First Bank of Redemption Creek. The words came slowly, each one weighted. The manager, Edward Palmer, he's been embezzling from depositors for months. I discovered it, gathered evidence. Yesterday he staged a robbery to cover his crimes and to eliminate me. Gavin's expression hardened. Palmer. Boston family, educated East, thinks he's too good for frontier territory. You know him, know of him. Came to my ranch once looking to buy horses, treated me like hired help on my own property. His jaw tightened. He's the one who shot you? Him or the men he hired? 4 of them dressed like outlaws. Claire's voice caught. They killed Milton Reed, our guard. Probably would have killed everyone in the bank if Edward hadn't needed witnesses to his false story. He told me to come with them, said he'd make my death look like I died in the robbery. But you ran. I ran. The memory of terror was still fresh, still sharp. I had the evidence in my bag, copies of his fraudulent transactions, proof of what he'd done. He wanted it destroyed, wanted me silent. I ran and they chased me and... She touched the bandages again. I don't remember much after I was hit. Just darkness and cold and thinking I'd never see morning. Gavin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was measured. The evidence. You still have it? Clara's heart sank. I dropped my bag when I ran. Edward has it by now. He's probably burned every page. So it's your word against his. And he's got the town convinced you died in a robbery gone wrong. Most likely. The hopelessness of it threatened to crush her. Without the documents, without proof, who would believe her accusations against a respected banker? I memorized most of the transactions. I could recreate some of it, testify to what I saw, but a dead girl's testimony won't help much, Gavin finished grimly, which means staying dead might be your best option right now. Clara blinked. What? If Palmer thinks you died in that forest, he won't be hunting you, gives you time to heal, to plan, to figure out how to bring evidence against him that'll stick. Gavin stood, paced to the window. How many people know you made it this far? I don't know. Edward had 4 men with him, maybe more. They were chasing me when I reached the creek, but I think I lost them in the forest. She tried to remember through the haze of pain and fear. They might have searched, might have found blood trails, but by then it was getting dark. Hard to track in darkness, and these mountains are easy to get lost in if you don't know them. He turned back to face her. They might have assumed you died of your wounds, or gotten taken by wolves, or fell in the creek and drowned. You think I should hide. I think charging into Cheyenne making accusations will get you killed before you can testify. His voice was blunt. Palmer's got resources, connections. He'll have stories prepared, witnesses coached. You show up alive and he'll finish what he started. Just quieter this time. Clara wanted to argue, to insist that justice couldn't wait, that the people of Redemption Creek deserved to know they'd been robbed by the man they trusted. But Gavin's logic was sound, and her body's weakness reminded her that righteous anger was no match for bullets. So what do I do? The question came out smaller than she intended. Hide forever? Let him win? You heal. Gavin's expression softened slightly. You get your strength back, and we figure out a way to bring him down that doesn't end with you in an unmarked grave. Sometimes the best way to fight is to stay alive long enough to see the bastard hang. The word struck something deep in Clara, a survival instinct that had kept her crawling through the forest even when dying seemed easier. She'd survived this long. She could survive longer. How long? She asked. A week at least before you can ride. 2 would be better. He must have seen her protest forming because he raised a hand. I know it's not what you want to hear, but infection, blood loss, shock, any of those could still kill you if you push too hard too soon. My grandmother taught me healing, and she'd have my hide if I let you rush off and undo all her remedies. Your grandmother was a healer? Cherokee, way back. Taught me what she learned from her mother. He gestured to the herbs hanging from the rafters. Half of what's keeping you alive right now is her knowledge. The other half is pure stubborn will, which you seem to have plenty of. Despite everything, Clara felt a ghost of a smile. I've been called stubborn before. Wear it proud. Stubbornness keeps you breathing when sense says to quit. Gavin moved back to the stove, refilled his coffee. You want more soup? Need to get your strength up. Please. As he ladled another serving, Clara studied the cabin more carefully. Simple but well-maintained, with the kind of order that spoke of a solitary person's habits. Hunting rifle over the door, pelts on the walls, books on a shelf near the fireplace. You live here alone? Just me and the horses. Had a dog once, but he died 2 winters back. He handed her the bowl. Prefer it that way, mostly. Mostly? It gets quiet sometimes. He shrugged. But quiet's better than complicated. Clara thought about her own little room in town. The boarding house where she'd lived since taking the bank position. She'd been alone too, by choice as much as circumstance. Independence had felt like freedom, right up until yesterday when she'd learned how quickly freedom could become isolation. I'm sorry, she said, for bringing complications to your door. Didn't have much choice in the matter, and neither did I. Gavin sat again, cradling his coffee. Found you dying, couldn't leave you. Simple as that. Some men would have. Then they're not men worth knowing. His eyes met hers, direct and honest. You're safe here, Miss Nelson, long as you need to be. I give you my word on that. The sincerity in his voice made Clara's throat tighten. She'd been so afraid for so long, first of Edward's unwanted courtship, then of the crimes she'd discovered, finally of the bullets chasing her into darkness. This stranger's promise of safety felt like water after days in the desert. Thank you, she whispered. And please call me Clara. Clara, he nodded. And I'm just Gavin. No misters out here. They sat in comfortable silence while Clara finished her soup. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Outside, she could hear birds singing and the distant sound of horses nickering. It was peaceful in a way she'd almost forgotten existed. Gavin, she said after a while, the man you were tracking yesterday, did you ever find him? The buck? He almost smiled. No. Gave up the hunt when I found you. He wins this round. I'm sorry I cost you your game. Don't be. Some things matter more than a hunt. He stood, collected her empty bowl. You should rest more. Sleep's the best medicine for what ails you. Clara wanted to protest that she'd slept enough, but her body disagreed. The simple act of sitting up and eating had exhausted her. She let Gavin help her lie back down, felt him adjust the blankets with surprising gentleness for a man who lived alone in the mountains. Gavin? She caught his wrist as he turned to go. When you found me, did I say anything? Fever talk, mostly. Names and fragments. He paused. You said, stay with me, a few times. Made me think someone was waiting for you. Clara's grip loosened. No. No one's waiting. Then maybe you were asking yourself to stay, to keep fighting. His expression was unreadable. Either way, you did. That counts for something. He moved away to tend the fire, and Clara closed her eyes. The words echoed in her mind. Stay with me. Had she said that? Or had someone said it to her, a voice in the darkness pulling her back from the edge? The memories were muddled, pain and delirium blurring together. But she had stayed. She'd survived. And now she had time to figure out what came next. Sleep claimed her gradually, pulling her under like gentle water. When she woke again, the sun had moved across the sky, and Gavin was at the table writing something in a ledger. He looked up when she stirred. "How do you feel?" Clara took inventory. The pain in her side had dulled to a persistent throb rather than the screaming agony of earlier. Her head felt clearer. "Better. Still hurts, but better." "Good. That's good." He set down his pen. "I need to check your wound. Make sure there's no infection starting. Fair warning, it's going to hurt." She nodded, bracing herself as he approached with clean cloth and a bowl of something that smelled sharp and medicinal. He worked efficiently, untying the bandages and peeling them away from her skin. Clara hissed at the sting but held still. "Looks clean," Gavin said after a moment. "No pus, no red streaks. The poultice is doing its job." He applied fresh medicine, something that burned like fire and made her gasp, and wrapped new bandages. "Sorry, I know it's not pleasant." "It's fine." Clara forced the words through gritted teeth. "Better than the alternative." "True enough." He disposed of the soiled bandages in the fire. "You're healing well. Tough constitution." "My father used to say I was too stubborn to die when convenient." The memory brought a pang. Her father had passed 3 years ago, peacefully in his sleep, but she still missed his quiet encouragement. He'd have been proud of her work at the bank, horrified by what Edward had done. "Sounds like a wise man," Gavin said. He was. Clara watched the fire devour the bandages, erasing the evidence of her injury. "He taught me mathematics, bookkeeping, said women had as much right to numbers as men, maybe more since we had to count every penny to make ends meet." "That how you ended up at the bank?" "That and necessity. After he died, I needed work. The previous bank manager took a chance on me despite the scandal of hiring a woman." She smiled sadly. "Mr. Hendricks was a good man. Died of heart failure last year. Edward replaced him, and everything changed." "Changed how?" Clara considered how much to explain. But if she was staying here, if Gavin was risking himself to shelter her, he deserved the full truth. Edward came with recommendations from Boston banks, impressive credentials. The board was thrilled to have someone with his education and connections. At first he was charm itself, treating me with elaborate courtesy, praising my work, suggesting we'd make excellent partners in both business and life. She pulled the blanket tighter. I was flattered, stupid but flattered. A wealthy, educated man interested in me? It seemed like the answer to every practical concern a single woman has. But he changed after I kept refusing his proposals, became proprietary, controlling, started making comments about how I was wasting my potential on mere clerical work, how I should be home managing a household, his household. The memory made her skin crawl. Then I noticed the discrepancies in the books. At first I thought they were mistakes, but the pattern was too consistent. Money going into accounts that didn't exist, withdrawals that showed in our records but not in the depositor receipts. He was stealing systematically. For months, maybe longer, I could only verify back to when he started. Clara's hands fisted in the blankets. The people of Redemption Creek trusted him. They deposited their savings, their children's futures, their business's operating capital, and he just took it, transferred it through false accounts, probably sending it back east to his family's banks. Gavin's jaw was tight. How much? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. I'd need the full books to calculate exactly. She met his eyes. Enough to destroy lives. Enough that farmers won't be able to buy seed next spring. Enough that businesses will fail. Enough that families who saved for years will have nothing. And you were going to expose him. I made copies. Documentation of every suspicious transaction. I was taking them to the marshal yesterday after work. Her voice broke slightly. Instead, Edward robbed his own bank, killed a good man, and tried to kill me to keep his secret safe. Gavin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hard. Men like that need hanging. Men like that have lawyers and connections and money. Clara blinked back frustrated tears. Without proof, I'm just a hysterical woman making wild accusations against a respected banker. With proof, I might have had a chance. Now we find another way. Gavin crossed to the window, looked out at the forest. There's always another way. Just takes time to see it. You sound certain. I've seen bad men fall before. Sometimes justice is slow, but it comes. He turned back to her. For now, you focus on healing. Let me worry about keeping watch. You think they'll come here? Don't know. But I sleep light and I know these mountains better than any townsman. His expression was grim. They come looking. They'll find it harder than they expect. Something in his tone suggested experience beyond simple frontier self-reliance. Clara studied him more carefully, the way he moved with unconscious precision. The old scar above his left eyebrow. The look in his eyes that said he'd seen things that didn't leave you. You were in the war, she said quietly. Gavin's shoulders tensed. Most men my age were, but it's still with you. Some things don't let go easy. He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't push. Everyone who'd lived through that horror carried scars, visible or otherwise. The afternoon drifted by in quiet rhythms. Gavin made more soup, tended his horses, brought Clara water, and checked her bandages again. She dozed intermittently, her body demanding rest even when her mind wanted to stay alert. Each time she woke, he was there, reading by the fire or mending tack, or simply sitting watch like a sentry. As evening approached, bringing shadows that stretched long across the cabin floor, Clara finally asked the question that had been building all day. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You could have left me by that creek, avoided all this trouble. Gavin looked up from the harness he was repairing. You want the honest answer? Always. Because leaving you to die would have made me the kind of man I don't want to be. He set down his work. I've seen enough death, Clara. Caused enough of it during the war. When I came out here, I promised myself I'd be done with killing, done with letting people suffer when I could help. You needed help. Simple as that. It's not simple. Edward and his men can come or not come. Either way, I made my choice. His voice was steady. I'm not afraid of them. Clara believed him. There was something in Gavin Callahan that suggested he'd faced worse than hired outlaws and survived. But that didn't make her feel less guilty about bringing danger to his door. I'll leave as soon as I can travel, she promised. I won't put you at risk longer than necessary. You'll leave when you're healed enough to survive the journey. He returned to his work. Besides, might be I'm getting used to the company. Cabin's awful quiet with just me talking to horses. Despite everything, Clara almost laughed. Your horses don't talk back? Not in any language I understand. The corner of his mouth twitched. You, on the other hand, use actual words. It's a nice change. They shared a smile, brief but genuine, and something in the cabin's atmosphere shifted. The tension that had colored the day eased slightly, replaced by a tentative sense of partnership. They were two people thrown together by circumstance, but maybe that was enough to build something resembling trust. As darkness fell and Gavin lit lamps against the night, Clara felt her eyes growing heavy again. Before sleep claimed her, she spoke once more into the firelit dimness. Gavin? Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For staying with me. There was a pause, and then his voice came soft through the darkness, carrying an echo of words spoken during her fever when death had come so close. Always, Clara, for as long as you need. She drifted off with those words wrapped around her like a promise, and for the first time since the bullets started flying, Clara Nelson felt something almost like safety. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over the mountains, vast and indifferent. But inside Gavin Callahan's cabin, two people who'd been alone found themselves unexpectedly less so, bound together by circumstance and survival and the strange alchemy that sometimes transforms strangers into something more. The fire burned low. The stars wheeled overhead, and tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but they would face it together. For now, that was enough. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and oddly natural. Clara's strength returned gradually, measured in small victories. Sitting up without dizziness, walking to the cabin door, managing to dress herself in the spare shirt and trousers Gavin had provided. Her wound was healing cleanly, the angry red fading to pink at the edges. though it still pulled and ached when she moved wrong. Gavin proved to be unexpectedly easy company. He moved through his days with quiet efficiency, tending his horses, hunting small game, maintaining the cabin and surrounding property. He didn't fill silence with unnecessary words, but when he spoke, Clara found herself listening. He had a way of explaining things. How to read weather in the clouds, which plants had healing properties, how the mountain elk moved with the seasons, that revealed a deep connection to this land. On the fourth morning, Clara woke to find him gone, and a note on the table. Checking traps. Back by noon. Coffee's hot. Don't overdo it. She smiled at his terse instructions and poured herself a cup, savoring the bitter warmth. The cabin felt different without him in it, larger somehow, and quieter in a way that made her aware of every small sound. She moved to the window, looking out at the clearing where Gavin's horses grazed peacefully. Beautiful animals, sturdy and well cared for. A gray gelding that must be Smoke, a bay mare, and 3 younger horses that showed the quality bloodlines Gavin bred for. She was watching them when she heard it, distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming fast. Clara's heart lurched. Her hand went instinctively to her side, to the gun that wasn't there. The hoofbeats grew louder, and through the trees she caught glimpses of movement. 3 riders, maybe 4, pushing hard toward the cabin. Had they found her? After days of safety, had Edward's men finally tracked her here? She looked around frantically for a weapon. Gavin's rifle was gone, taken with him. But there, a hunting knife on the table, and near the door, an old cavalry saber mounted on the wall. She grabbed the knife, her wounded side screaming protest, and pressed herself against the wall beside the door. The hoofbeats thundered into the clearing and stopped. Boot heels hit the ground. Clara's grip tightened on the knife handle, her breath coming short and sharp. "Gavin!" a voice called out. "You home, you ornery bastard?" Clara froze. The voice was rough but friendly, with none of the menace she'd been expecting. "Gavin, got news from town that won't wait." More voices, multiple men talking over each other. Not an ambush then. Friends? Neighbors? Clara stayed pressed against the wall, uncertain. Gavin had said he kept to himself, but these men clearly knew him. "Maybe he's out on the range," another voice suggested. "Want to wait? His door's never locked. We could leave a note." The door swung open before Clara could move, and a man stepped through. He was older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a marshal's star pinned to his vest. His eyes found Clara immediately, widening in shock as he took in her defensive stance, the knife in her hand, her pale face. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "You're Clara Nelson." The knife nearly fell from her nerveless fingers. "How?" "Because we've been searching for your body for 3 days." The marshal held up both hands, showing them empty. "I'm Daniel Hawkins, Territorial Marshal. You were coming to see me when this all went to hell, weren't you?" Clara's mind reeled. This was the marshal she'd been trying to reach, standing in Gavin's cabin, looking at her like she'd risen from the grave. Behind him, 2 more men crowded the doorway, one young and wearing a deputy's badge, the other a weathered rancher she didn't recognize. Yes, I was coming to you about Edward Palmer, about the bank, about the embezzlement and murder." Hawkins finished grimly. "We know, or at least we know some of it. Thomas Winters talked after Palmer couldn't keep his story straight." "Thomas is alive?" "Alive and singing like a canary once we pushed him." The marshal moved slowly into the cabin, his eyes never leaving Clara. "Palmer told everyone you died in the robbery, said the outlaws shot you when you tried to run. We've had search parties out for days looking for your body." "Edward wants me dead," Clara said flatly. "I had evidence of his crimes. He staged the whole robbery to cover it up and eliminate me." "We figured as much after Thomas broke." Hawkins gestured to the others. "This is Deputy Carson and Hank Ridley, owns the ranch west of town. We've been riding circuit checking the homesteads, warning people about Palmer and his gang." "Gang?" Clara lowered the knife slightly. "You mean the Blackwell gang was real?" "Real enough, though Palmer was paying them." Hawkins' expression was grim. "They hit 2 more places after the bank, a stage station and a ranch house. Killed 3 more people. We've got posies out hunting them, but they know these mountains." The room spun slightly, and Clara gripped the table for support. 9 people dead, all because Edward Palmer wanted to steal with impunity. The deputy moved forward, concerned, but Clara waved him off. I'm fine. Just healing from the gunshot. The one Palmer said killed you. Hawkins studied her carefully. Where have you been, Miss Nelson? How'd you end up here? I ran. They chased me into the forest and shot me, but I kept going. I collapsed by a creek, and Gavin, Mr. Callahan, he found me. Brought me here, treated my wound, saved my life. Clara met the marshal's eyes. He's been protecting me while I heal. I was planning to come to Cheyenne as soon as I could travel. Good man, Callahan. The rancher, Hank, spoke for the first time. Kept to himself since he came back from the war, but he's solid. Knew his grandmother before she passed. Where is Gavin? Hawkins looked around the cabin. Checking his trap line. He left a note saying he'd be back by noon. Clara glanced at the sun's position through the window. Should be soon. We'll wait then. The marshal pulled out a chair, sat heavily. Because if you're alive and willing to testify, Miss Nelson, we've got a real chance at bringing Palmer to justice. Thomas gave us some of the details, but he's a scared rabbit who'll probably recant the moment a lawyer looks at him hard. You, though, you're the one who found the evidence. Your testimony could make this stick. The evidence is gone. Edward has it now, probably burned it. Maybe. But you remember what you found, don't you? The transactions, the false accounts. Clara's mind had been working through those numbers every night, afraid of forgetting. Most of it, names, dates, amounts. I can recreate a lot of the documentation from memory. That's something. Hawkins leaned forward. But Palmer's already got his story established. Heroic manager who tried to save his bank, tragic teller who died in the robbery. Half the town's at his house right now, bringing casseroles and sympathy. The bitter irony of it made Clara want to laugh or scream, or both. So what do? We prove he's a liar and a murderer. The marshal's voice was hard. But we've got to be smart about it. He's got resources, connections back east. We move wrong, and he'll slip through our fingers like smoke. A thought occurred to Clara, cold and tactical. He thinks I'm dead. That's an advantage. Could be. Hawkins considered. If you show up alive, though, he'll know we're coming for him. Might rabbit, might try to silence you permanent. We'd need to move fast. Or we use her as bait. The deputy, Carson, spoke up. Everyone turned to look at him, and he flushed, but continued. I mean, carefully, with protection. But if Palmer thinks she's alive and vulnerable, he might make a mistake trying to finish what he started. Absolutely not. The voice came from the doorway, sharp and final. They all turned to see Gavin standing there, 3 rabbits hanging from his belt and murder in his eyes. He looked at each lawman in turn before settling on Clara with an expression that mixed relief and fury. You want to use her as bait? Gavin's voice was dangerously quiet. The woman who barely survived one attempt on her life? You want to dangle her out there and hope Palmer takes another shot, except this time you'll be ready? Mr. Callahan, Hawkins stood. We're just discussing options. Discuss them without risking her neck again. Gavin moved into the cabin, set the rabbits on his work table with deliberate control. She's been through enough. Gavin, Clara said softly, they're trying to help. They're trying to catch Palmer, which I understand, but not at the cost of your safety. His eyes found hers, and the concern there made her chest tight. You've got time to heal, to get strong enough to travel to Cheyenne safely. Let them do their jobs without putting you in the line of fire again. Marshal Hawkins watched this exchange with interest. Mr. Callahan, I appreciate your concern for Miss Nelson's welfare. Palmer. Without it, we've got Thomas Winters, who's already wavering, and a lot of circumstantial evidence that a good lawyer will tear apart. Then find better evidence. Gavin's tone didn't soften. Search Palmer's house, his office, his bank accounts. Follow the money trail. Do actual detective work instead of asking a recovering woman to risk her life again. We are doing that work, Carson interjected. But Palmer's smart. He's had time to cover his tracks, burn documents, arrange his affairs. The best evidence walked out of that bank in Miss Nelson's bag, and now it's ashes. Clara stood, ignoring the pull in her side. I want Palmer caught. I want him to pay for what he did, to Milton Reed, to the people he robbed, to me. If using my testimony helps accomplish that, I'll do it. Clara. But, she continued, looking at Gavin, not stupidly. Not by making myself an easy target. We need to be smart about this. Smart means keeping you alive, Gavin said. Smart means making sure Edward can't hurt anyone else. Clara turned to Hawkins. What exactly are you proposing? The marshal glanced at Gavin, then back to Clara. Ideally, we'd like to get you safely to Cheyenne where you can give your testimony to the territorial judge. But the direct route, the main road, passes too close to Redemption Creek. Palmer's got eyes everywhere, and if word gets out you're alive, he'll move heaven and earth to stop you reaching Cheyenne. So we take a different route, Hank suggested, through the mountains over Coleman's Pass. Longer, harder, but avoids all the main roads. Coleman's Pass in September? Gavin shook his head. That's asking for trouble. Weather turns fast up there, and one early snow closes it completely. It's risky, Hawkins agreed, but less risky than riding straight into Palmer's territory. We could assemble a protection detail, deputies, reliable men, get Miss Nelson through the pass and down to Fort Russell. From there, it's a protected road to Cheyenne. Clara's mind worked through the logistics. Coleman's Pass was a treacherous mountain route that most travelers avoided unless they had good reason. But it would bypass Redemption Creek entirely, would put them on the eastern side of the range where Edward's influence didn't reach. How long would that take? She asked. 4 days, maybe 5, depending on weather and her condition. Hawkins looked at Gavin. You know that pass better than most. You'd need to guide us. No. Oh, Gavin's response was immediate. Mr. Callahan, I said no. You want to risk your necks on that pass, that's your business, but I'm not dragging Clara through the mountains before she's healed enough to survive it. I'm stronger every day, Clara protested. Another few days and I could manage getting shot again? Could manage falling off a cliff if a horse spooks? Could manage freezing to death if the weather turns? Gavin's control was fraying, his voice rising. You're barely walking without pain, Clara. That wound could reopen. You could develop fever. A dozen things could go wrong. And up on that pass, there's no shelter, no help, no second chances. The cabin fell silent. Clara saw the fear beneath Gavin's anger, the same fear that had kept him whispering, "Stay with me," through her fever dreams. He'd fought to keep her alive, and now strangers were asking him to risk her again. She crossed to him slowly, laid a gentle hand on his arm. I know you're trying to protect me, and I'm grateful, more than I can say. But Edward won't stop. Even if I hide here forever, eventually someone will connect the dots. Someone will wonder why you're buying extra supplies, or see smoke from your cabin when you're supposed to be alone. And when that happens, he'll come. Then I'll deal with him. Against how many men? 4? 6? 10? Clara's voice was gentle but firm. You can't fight them all, Gavin. The only way to truly be safe is to expose Edward, to bring the law down on him so completely that he can't threaten anyone again. Gavin's jaw worked, and she could see the war in his eyes between keeping her safe and knowing she was right. Finally, he looked at Hawkins. 2 weeks. Give her 2 weeks to heal properly, and I'll take you through Coleman's Pass. Mr. Callahan, we don't have 2 weeks or find another guide. Gavin's tone brooked no argument. I won't risk her life on that pass until she's strong enough to survive it. If Palmer makes a move before then, we deal with it. But I won't send her into those mountains to die of exposure or infection because you're in a hurry. Hawkins studied Gavin's face, then nodded slowly. 2 weeks. But we'll need to coordinate, plan this carefully. Palmer can't know she's alive until we're ready to move. He won't hear it from me, Hank said. Far as I'm concerned, I rode out here checking on Gavin, same as always. Same, Carson agreed. We'll keep searching for Miss Nelson's body, keep the story going that she died in the forest. What about Thomas Winters? Clara asked. If he's already talking, won't he mention that I might have survived? Thomas is safely tucked away in protective custody, Hawkins said. Palmer doesn't know we have him, thinks he ran scared after the robbery. We're keeping it that way until we're ready to move. The pieces were falling into place, a plan forming from chaos. 2 weeks to heal, then the dangerous journey through Coleman's Pass to Cheyenne. 2 weeks to prepare, to gather evidence, to build an unshakable case. 2 weeks of borrowed time. There's something else, Clara said slowly. Edward's employers, the bank's board of directors. They should know what he's done. If we can get word to them, get them to freeze his accounts, he won't be able to access the money he stole. The board's mostly in Cheyenne, Hawkins said. Good thinking. I can send telegrams, start that process quietly. If Palmer tries to withdraw large sums suddenly, it'll flag his guilt. They spent the next hour planning in more detail. Hawkins sketched out a route through the mountains, marking water sources and potential shelter spots. They discussed supplies needed, how many men to bring, contingencies if the weather turned, or if Palmer somehow learned Clara was alive. Through it all, Gavin remained mostly silent, his expression troubled. When the others finally mounted their horses to leave, Clara walked out with them. 2 weeks, Miss Nelson, Hawkins said from his saddle. Use them to get strong. We'll need you sharp when the time comes. I will. Clara shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. And Marshall, thank you for believing me, for helping. You're the one doing the brave thing. His expression was kind. Most people would have stayed hidden, let someone else fight. You're choosing to stand up. That takes courage. After they rode away, Clara turned to find Gavin leaning against the cabin wall, arms crossed, looking out at the mountains. You're angry, she said. I'm terrified. His voice was low. Coleman's Pass killed 3 travelers last winter. The weather up there is unpredictable, the trails treacherous. And that's without armed men hunting you. Clara moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to the distant peaks. I'm scared too. But hiding isn't living, Gavin. It's just a slower kind of dying. Living doesn't matter if you're dead. And surviving doesn't matter if you've lost everything that made life worth living. She touched his arm again, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. I have to do this. Not just for me, but for everyone Edward hurt. For Milton Reed's family. For the people who trusted their money to that bank. Noble sentiments won't stop a bullet. No, but they'll give me a reason to keep going when things get hard. Clara turned to face him fully. I'm not asking you to be happy about this. I'm just asking you to understand why I have to try. Gavin was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes troubled. When he spoke, his voice was rough. That night I found you. You were so close to gone. Your pulse was barely there, your skin like ice. I carried you back here thinking you'd probably die before dawn. He paused, swallowed hard. And then you didn't. You fought through fever and pain and blood loss, and you lived. Watching you fight so hard, it mattered. You matter. The words hit Clara square in the chest. Gavin, so forgive me if I'm not enthusiastic about plans that risk throwing all that away. His hand came up, not quite touching her face, but hovering near. You're asking me to guide you into danger, and every instinct I have says to lock that door and keep you safe here until Palmer's caught, or dead, or forgotten about you. But you won't. No. His hand dropped. Because you're right. Hiding isn't living, and you deserve better than spending your life looking over your shoulder. He pushed off from the wall, headed back toward the cabin. But I reserve the right to be miserable about it for the next 2 weeks. Despite the gravity of everything, Clara almost smiled. Noted. The days that followed fell into new patterns. Each morning, Gavin put Clara through exercises to rebuild her strength, walking the perimeter of the clearing, then venturing into the forest, gradually increasing the distance and difficulty. Her wound protested at first, pulling and aching, but slowly the pain lessened. The angry red faded to pink, and new tissue knitted together. You heal fast, Gavin observed one morning, unwrapping her bandages to check the wound. Another week, and this'll be nothing but a scar. My mother was the same way. Used to say we had tough leather instead of normal skin. Clara watched him work, noting the care he took to avoid hurting her. You're good at this. The doctoring. Had plenty of practice during the war. His voice went flat the way it always did when the war came up. Field medicine mostly, learning to patch holes in men who'd probably die anyway. But some didn't die. Some didn't. He finished rebandaging, stepped back. Your grandmother, the Cherokee woman who taught you, what was she like? Gavin's expression softened. Fierce. Tiny woman, barely came up to my shoulder, but she could face down a charging bull without flinching. She taught me everything that mattered. How to read the land, how to respect what we take from it, how to heal more than just bodies. He smiled at the memory. Used to tell me that medicine was about listening, that the patient's body would tell you what it needed if you paid attention. She sounds remarkable. She was. Gavin gathered the old bandages. Lost her when I was 20, right before I enlisted. Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of the choices I made after. I think, Clara said carefully, she'd be proud of the man you became. Someone who saves people instead of leaving them to die. Someone who fights for what's right, even when it's hard. Gavin met her eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Then he cleared his throat, looked away. You should practice with the rifle today. You'll need to be able to shoot if things go wrong up on that pass. Clara had been expecting this. I've never fired a gun. Then it's past time you learned. He pulled his rifle from above the door. Come on, I'll show you. They spent the afternoon in the clearing, Gavin teaching Clara the basics of marksmanship. How to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. The first few shots went wild, the recoil surprising her, but gradually she found the rhythm of it. Good, Gavin said after she hit the target, a knot on a tree trunk, 3 times in a row. You've got steady hands and good eyes. Keep practicing and you'll be decent. Decent enough to survive? Decent enough to give yourself a fighting chance. He reloaded the rifle. But remember, shooting at a tree is different from shooting at a man. When the time comes, you hesitate, you die. The bluntness of it should have shocked her, but after everything she'd been through, Clara only nodded. I'll remember. As the days passed and her strength returned, Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of Gavin's isolated life. She learned to cook on his wood stove, to tend the horses, to recognize the calls of different birds and what they meant about incoming weather. She helped him repair tack, sort through his grandmother's dried herbs, stack firewood for the coming winter. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and talk, cautiously at first, then with growing ease. Gavin spoke rarely about the war, but he told her about coming west, about finding this land and building his cabin, about the first terrible winter when he'd nearly starved before learning to read the mountain seasons. Clara talked about her father's bookshop, about growing up surrounded by numbers and stories, about the strange experience of being the first woman to work in a profession that didn't want her. Didn't it bother you? Gavin asked one night. The men who thought you didn't belong. Of course it bothered me. Clara stared into the flames. But my father taught me that the best answer to prejudice is competence, so I became the best teller that bank ever had. Faster at counting, more accurate with accounts, better at remembering customers' names and situations. I made myself indispensable. And then Palmer tried to get rid of you anyway. Because I became inconvenient. She smiled bitterly. Turns out competence only protects you until you see something you're not supposed to see. Gavin was quiet for a moment. You could have married him, played along, pretended not to notice the theft. Would have been easier. Easier isn't always right. Clara looked at him. Would you have chosen easier? After the war, you could have gone back east, found an easy job, lived a comfortable life. Instead, you came here, to this hard country, and built something honest. That's different. How? Because I was running from things. You're running toward justice. Maybe we're both doing both. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Running from what hurt us, running toward what might heal us. The fire crackled between them, and outside an owl called through the darkness. After a while, Gavin spoke again, his voice soft. I'm glad I found you by that creek, Clara. Even with all the complications, even with the danger coming, I'm glad. Clara's throat tightened. I'm glad too. Strange as that sounds, considering I was half dead at the time. Maybe that's what makes it matter. Gavin's eyes reflected firelight. Finding each other when we were both lost in our own ways. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither quite knew how to address. So they sat in comfortable silence instead, 2 solitary people who'd found unexpected companionship in the shadow of coming danger. On the 13th day, Gavin declared Clara fit enough to attempt the pass. She could walk 5 miles without excessive pain, could ride a horse at a trot, could load and fire his rifle with reasonable accuracy. Her wound had closed cleanly, and the flesh around it was pink and healing rather than red and inflamed. "You're as ready as you're going to be," he said, checking her bandages one final time. "But promise me something." "What?" "If the pain gets bad up there, if your wound starts bleeding again, you tell me immediately. Pride won't keep you alive in those mountains." "I promise." Clara caught his hand, squeezed it. "And Gavin, thank you for everything. For saving me, for protecting me, for caring when you didn't have to." His fingers tightened around hers. "Wasn't a choice, Clara. From the moment I found you, there wasn't any other option but to keep you alive." "Still, thank you." They stood there in the morning light, hands clasped, on the edge of the journey that would take them into danger and uncertainty. Tomorrow, Marshal Hawkins and his men would arrive. Tomorrow, they would begin the treacherous climb through Coleman's Pass. But today, in this moment, there was just the two of them. Two people who'd saved each other in different ways, bound together by circumstance and growing into something that looked remarkably like choice. "Whatever happens up there," Gavin said quietly, "we face it together. You're not alone anymore." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. She wasn't alone. After years of careful independence, of keeping the world at arm's length, she'd found someone worth trusting. Now all they had to do was survive long enough to see where that trust might lead. Marshal Hawkins arrived at dawn with 5 men, all of them hard-eyed and heavily armed. Clara recognized Deputy Carson, and Hank Ridley sat easy in his saddle like he'd been born there. The others were strangers, 2 more deputies and a grizzled tracker named Webb, who Hawkins introduced as the best pathfinder in the territory after Gavin himself. "Weather's holding clear," Webb announced, squinting at the sky. "But there's snow smell in the air. We get up that pass and back down before the storms hit, or we don't get through at all." Gavin was already saddling Smoke, his movements efficient and controlled. He'd barely spoken that morning, and Clara recognized the tension in his shoulders as the same coiled readiness she'd seen in men before battle. He was preparing himself for what was coming, building walls against the fear. Clara's own horse was the bay mare Gavin had chosen for her, steady-tempered and sure-footed, named Copper for her burnished coat. Clara ran a hand down the mare's neck, grateful for the hours Gavin had spent teaching her to ride properly over the past 2 weeks. She was an expert, but she could stay mounted and handle basic terrain. "You ready for this?" Hawkins asked, riding up beside her. "As ready as I'll ever be." Clara checked her saddle one more time, making sure the bedroll and supplies were secure. Gavin had given her his spare coat, warm wool that smelled faintly of pine smoke and leather. She wore the trousers he'd provided, practical for riding, with her hair braided and tucked under a hat. Anyone seeing her from a distance would read her as a young man, which was exactly the point. "We ride hard and we ride quiet," Hawkins addressed the group. "Palmer's got men watching the main roads, but far as we know, nobody's expecting us to attempt Coleman's Pass this late in the season. Still, we stay sharp. No fires unless absolutely necessary, no unnecessary noise. We're ghosts until we reach Fort Russell." The men nodded, checking weapons and supplies with practiced ease. These weren't townsmen playing at lawmen. They were frontier veterans who knew the stakes. Gavin swung into his saddle and guided Smoke over to Clara. "Stay close to me. The trail gets narrow in places, and if your horse spooks, I need to be able to reach you." "I will." She met his eyes, saw the worry he was trying to hide. "I'll be careful." "You better be." His voice was rough. "Because I didn't spend 2 weeks keeping you alive just to watch you fall off a mountain." Despite her nerves, Clara almost smiled. "I'll do my best not to fall off any mountains today." "Appreciate it." He turned Smoke toward the trail. "Let's move out before I change my mind about this whole damn thing." They rode single file into the forest, Gavin leading, then Clara, with the lawmen strung out behind them. The morning was crisp and bright, the kind of September day that promised Indian summer, even as it hinted at the winter lurking just beyond the calendar's edge. Birds sang in the pines, and somewhere in the distance elk bugled their mating calls. For the first few hours, the terrain was familiar. The same forest Clara had fled through 2 weeks ago, though now she rode rather than ran, and companions surrounded her rather than enemies. They followed game trails that twisted through the trees, always climbing, the air growing thinner and cooler as they gained elevation. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat cold provisions. Clara's side ached from the constant movement, but not unbearably. She stretched carefully, feeling the pull of healing tissue, and caught Gavin watching her with that assessing look he got when checking for signs of trouble. "I'm fine," she assured him quietly. "You're favoring your left side." "A little, but it's manageable." Ati, she took a drink from her canteen. "How much farther to the pass itself?" "Another day and a half at this pace. We'll camp tonight in a box canyon I know. Good shelter, hidden from the main trail. Tomorrow we hit the serious climbing." He looked up at the peaks ahead, where snow already capped the highest points. "That's when it gets dangerous." "More dangerous than being hunted by outlaws?" "Different dangerous. Mountains don't care about your reasons or your righteousness. They'll kill you just as dead whether you're innocent or guilty." His expression was grim. Coleman's Pass is a demon even in summer. This late in the season, with weather turning, it's damn near suicide. "Then why are we attempting it?" "Because the alternative is worse." Gavin's jaw tightened. "At least on the mountain we can see danger coming. On the main road, Palmer could have men waiting around any bend." They remounted and continued climbing. The forest began to change as they gained elevation, pines giving way to alpine fir and twisted bristlecone, the undergrowth thinning until only hardy scrub remained. The air grew colder, and Clara was grateful for Gavin's thick coat. Late afternoon brought them to the box canyon Gavin had mentioned. It was a natural fortress, accessible only through a narrow defile that two men could hold against an army. Inside, the canyon opened into a sheltered space maybe 100 yards across, with a spring trickling from the rocks and enough grass for the horses. "Good spot," Webb acknowledged, looking around with professional appreciation. "Defensible." "Used it before during hunting trips." Gavin swung down from smoke. "We can risk a small fire here. The canyon walls will disperse the smoke, and there's no way anyone's sneaking up on us through that entrance." They made camp efficiently, each man knowing his role. Hawkins posted Carson at the entrance as first watch. Hank tended the horses while Webb and the other deputies gathered wood and started a modest fire. Gavin helped Clara unsaddle Copper, his hands checking the mare's legs and hooves with practiced thoroughness. "You did well today," he said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy." "My backside would disagree with you about that," Clara grimaced. "I'm going to feel this tomorrow." "Probably, but you stayed mounted, kept pace, didn't complain." He smiled slightly. "That's more than some grown men manage their first day in the saddle." "I had a good teacher." "You had stubbornness and determination. I just pointed you in the right direction." Gavin finished with Copper and moved to check Clara's wound while the others were distracted. "Let me see." She turned away from the group, untucked her shirt enough for him to examine the bandages. His fingers were gentle, professional, checking for blood or signs of reopening. "Holding good," he announced. "A little inflamed from the riding, but nothing serious. I'll put fresh salve on it after we eat." Dinner was jerky, hardtack, and coffee, frontier rations that tasted better than they had any right to after a hard day's ride. The men ate in comfortable silence, too tired for much conversation. Clara found herself studying them, Hawkins with his weathered competence, Carson's youthful eagerness barely contained, Webb's silent watchfulness. These were good men risking their lives to help her bring a criminal to justice. "Miss Nelson," Hawkins broke the quiet. "I've been meaning to ask, how much of Palmer's embezzlement do you think you can document?" Clara had been expecting this question, had been working through the numbers in her head every night. "I memorized the accounts for the 3 months before I was shot. 37 suspicious transactions totaling just over $8,000. But that was only what I could verify personally. There were older entries I didn't have time to trace." Hawkins whistled low. 8,000 in 3 months. If he'd been at it longer. The bank's been operating for 3 years. If Palmer started stealing when he took over last year, we could be looking at 30 or 40,000. The magnitude of it still staggered her. That's not counting what he paid the Blackwell gang to stage the robbery and murders. "Son of a bitch," one of the deputies spat into the fire. "Begging your pardon, miss." "No pardon needed. He is a son of a bitch." Clara's voice was hard. "And I intend to see him hang for it." "That's the spirit." Hawkins raised his coffee cup in salute. "To justice, and to the stubborn women who won't let bastards get away with murder. They drank to that, and Clara felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. She wasn't helpless anymore, wasn't running blind through the forest with a bullet in her side. She had allies now, a plan, a purpose. Edward Palmer had tried to kill her and failed. Now she would return the favor, legally, publicly, permanently. After dinner, Gavin changed her bandages by firelight while the others tactfully looked elsewhere. The wound was healing well, the flesh knitting together cleanly, but the ride had irritated it. He applied more of his grandmother's salve, and Clara hissed at the sting. "Sorry," he murmured. "I know it burns." Better than infection. She watched his face in the flickering light, noting the concern in his eyes, the gentleness in his touch. "Gavin, after this is over, after we get to Cheyenne and I testify, what will you do?" He was quiet for a moment, wrapping fresh bandages. "Go back to my ranch, I suppose. Back to my horses and my solitude." "Does that still appeal to you? The solitude?" His hand stilled. It did. Before. He didn't finish the thought, but Clara heard what he didn't say. "Before you. Before everything changed." She touched his hand, stopping his work. "I was thinking, if things go well, if Palmer's convicted and I'm safe again, I could use a fresh start somewhere. Somewhere away from Redemption Creek and all its memories." Gavin's eyes met hers, searching. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe solitude is overrated." Her heart hammered. "I'm saying maybe two people who've been alone could be alone together instead, if one of them was interested." The firelight cast shadows across his face, and for a moment Clara couldn't read his expression. Then he smiled, slow and genuine and transforming. "I might be interested," he said softly, "depending on how things go up on that pass. Then I guess I better make sure I don't fall off any mountains." "Guess you better." He finished the bandaging, his touch lingering perhaps longer than medically necessary. Around them, the canyon walls held back the darkness, and the fire pushed warmth into the cold mountain air. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was possibility, and that was enough. They slept in shifts, the men rotating guard duty through the night. Clara dozed fitfully, her side aching, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Sometime near dawn, she woke to find Gavin sitting nearby, his rifle across his knees, watching the canyon entrance with the stillness of a hunter. "Can't sleep?" she whispered. "My watch." He didn't take his eyes off the entrance. "Plus, sleep and I aren't always on good terms." "The war?" "Among other things." He glanced at her. "You should rest. Tomorrow's the hardest day." "Can't. Too much thinking." She sat up carefully, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the pre-dawn chill. "Tell me about Coleman's Pass. What should I expect?" Gavin was silent for a long moment, and Clara thought he might refuse. Then he started speaking, his voice low so as not to wake the others. "It's a knife-edge trail carved into the mountain face. In some places, it's barely wide enough for a single horse. On one side, you've got cliff wall. On the other, a drop of 1,000 feet straight down." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the tension beneath. The pass itself sits at 11,000 feet. Air's thin enough you'll feel dizzy. Wind comes through there like God's own fury, strong enough to blow a horse right off the trail if you're not careful. "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to prepare you." He looked at her directly. "This isn't like riding through the forest, Clara. One mistake, one moment of panic or carelessness, and you're dead. We all are." "Then I won't make mistakes." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "The scared part of me wants to turn around right now, take you back to the cabin, and say to hell with Palmer and justice and all of it." His voice roughened. "The rational part knows that's not an option. But God, Clara, if something happens to you up there?" "It won't." She reached for his hand, found it, held tight. "Because you'll be with me. You'll guide me through, just like you've guided me through everything else. I can't control mountains." "No, but you know them. You respect them. And you won't let me do anything stupid." She squeezed his fingers. "I trust you, Gavin. Completely." The words hung in the cold air between them, and Clara realized with sudden clarity that they were absolutely true. She trusted this man, this near stranger who'd become essential with her life, her future, her heart. Gavin's thumb stroked across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Then I guess I better make damn sure I'm worthy of that trust. They sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, hands clasped, gathering strength from each other for what was coming. Around them, the canyon walls caught the first hint of light, and somewhere far above, the peaks of Coleman's Pass waited. Indifferent, deadly, inevitable. The second day's ride started before full sunrise. They broke camp quickly, eating cold rations in the saddle, pushing hard up increasingly steep terrain. The trees thinned and disappeared, replaced by bare rock and hardy alpine plants that clung to existence in the thin soil. The horses struggled with the altitude, their breath coming harder, their steps more labored. By mid-morning, they'd reached the snow line. What had been patches became drifts, then consistent coverage that crunched under the horses' hooves. The temperature plummeted, and Clara was grateful for every layer Gavin had insisted she wear. There. Webb pointed ahead to where the trail seemed to simply end at a wall of rock. That's the entrance to the pass. Clara stared, her stomach sinking. The trail, if you could call it that, was carved into the mountainside like a scar, switchbacking up the sheer face in a series of terrifying zigzags. From this distance, it looked impossibly narrow, impossibly steep. Jesus, Carson breathed. We're actually going up that. We are. Gavin's voice was grim. Single file, slow and steady. Let your horse find its footing. They're smarter about this than we are. Don't look down unless you absolutely have to. And if you feel panic rising, focus on the horse's mane, on your breathing, on anything except the drop. Comforting, one of the deputies muttered. Truth's more useful than comfort. Gavin looked back at the group. Anyone wants to turn back, now's the time. No shame in it. This trail's killed better men than us. Nobody moved. After a moment, Hawkins nodded. We're with you. Let's get this done. They started up the switchbacks, and within minutes, Clara understood why Gavin had been so concerned. The trail was barely 4 feet wide in places, with the mountain wall pressing close on the left and empty air yawning on the right. The drop was so sheer, so absolute, that looking at it made her head swim. She fixed her eyes on Smoke's gray tail ahead of her, on Gavin's back straight and steady in the saddle. Copper moved carefully beneath her, each step deliberate, the mare's intelligence evident in how she placed her hooves. Behind Clara, she could hear the other horses breathing hard, the creak of leather, the occasional clatter of a hoof on stone that made her heart stop. They climbed for hours, the trail zigzagging back and forth across the mountain face. The air grew thinner, making Clara's head pound, her lungs work harder. Her side ached with every breath, but she gritted her teeth and focused on staying mounted, staying calm, staying alive. Around noon, disaster struck. They were on a particularly narrow section when Carson's horse, younger, less experienced, spooked at something. Maybe a shadow, maybe a sound, maybe just the sheer terror of the drop. The animal sidestepped, its rear hooves scrabbling at the trail's edge. Carson grabbed for the saddle horn, overcorrected, and the horse reared in panic. "Easy!" Hawkins shouted from behind. "Easy, damn it!" But the horse was beyond easy. It spun, knocking into the mountain wall, its hooves slipping on loose rock. Carson fought to control it, his face white with terror, and for a horrible moment Clara thought both horse and rider would plunge over the edge. Then Gavin was there somehow. He dismounted and moved past Clara faster than should have been possible, reaching Carson's bridle, grabbing it with both hands, speaking in that low, steady voice he used with spooked animals. "Easy now, easy. Nobody's going to hurt you. That's it. Just breathe. Just stand." The horse shuddered, nostrils flaring, but slowly, impossibly, it calmed. Gavin kept talking, kept stroking its nose, kept projecting absolute confidence that everything was fine. After what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute, the horse stood quiet, trembling but controllable. "Get down," Gavin told Carson quietly. "Walk behind me. I'll lead your horse." Carson dismounted on shaking legs, his face bloodless. Gavin took the reins and started walking, leading the spooked horse while Carson followed on foot. It took another hour to reach a wider section where they could safely stop. "Christ," Carson gasped, sinking to a rock. I thought we were gone." "You did fine," Hawkins gripped the young deputy's shoulder. Held on, kept your head. That's all anyone can ask. But Clara saw the way Gavin was looking at the trail ahead. Narrow, treacherous, another several hours of riding before they'd reach the pass itself. One spooked horse had nearly killed them all, and they were barely halfway up. We keep going, Gavin said before anyone could suggest otherwise. Weather's still holding, and we're committed now. Turning back is just as dangerous as going forward. They remounted, Carson visibly pale but determined. Clara caught Gavin's eye as they started moving again, and he gave her a small nod. You're doing well. Stay strong. She nodded back, drawing courage from his steadiness. The afternoon wore on, endless and terrifying. The trail grew steeper, narrower, more treacherous. Snow patches became ice in places, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses carefully over the slick sections. The wind picked up, howling through the pass like a living thing, cold enough to burn Clara's exposed skin despite her layers. She lost track of time, focusing only on the next step, the next breath, the next few feet of trail. Her side throbbed mercilessly. Her legs ached from gripping the saddle. Her hands were numb despite gloves, her face stiff with cold. But she kept going, kept following Gavin's steady progress, kept trusting that he knew what he was doing. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finally crested the pass itself. Clara looked up and gasped, despite her exhaustion. They stood on a saddle of rock between two towering summits, with the whole world spreading out below them. To the west, the mountains they'd climbed. To the east, more mountains descending gradually toward distant plains. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, the air so thin each breath felt like a gift. We made it, Clara whispered. We actually made it. Halfway. Gavin pointed down the eastern slope. Still have to get down, and that's worse than climbing. But we'll camp here tonight, in that shelter. He indicated a rocky overhang just off the pass. Can't risk going down in darkness. They led the horses to the shelter, barely more than a depression in the rocks, but it blocked the worst of the wind. No question of a fire at this altitude, so they huddled in bedrolls, sharing body heat, eating cold rations with fingers too numb to feel them properly. Clara's wound was bleeding again. She could feel the wetness seeping through the bandages, but she said nothing. They were through the worst of the climb, and she'd be damned if she'd cause problems now. She'd deal with it once they were safely down. Except Gavin noticed. Of course he noticed. Clara? His voice was quiet, meant only for her. You're bleeding. A little. It's fine. Let me see. Gavin, it's freezing. I'm not... Let me see. His tone brooked no argument. Clara sighed and pulled up her layers enough for him to check. In the failing light, she saw his jaw tighten as he examined the bandages. It's reopened. Not badly, but enough. He pressed clean cloth against it. Why didn't you say something? Because we were on that nightmare trail and there was nothing you could have done anyway. She met his eyes. And because I knew you'd blame yourself, which would be stupid. I pushed you too hard. You got us through the pass, that's what matters. She touched his cheek, feeling the cold roughness of his skin. I'm fine, Gavin. Sore and cold and tired, but fine. The bleeding will stop. He looked like he wanted to argue, but Hawkins called over a question about watch rotation, and the moment passed. Gavin rebandaged her wound as best he could in the cold and darkness, then wrapped her in his own bedroll along with hers, extra layers against the brutal mountain night. Stay close to me, he murmured. Body heat. Clara didn't argue. She pressed against his side and he wrapped an arm around her, sharing warmth. Around them, the other men settled into their own cold vigils. The wind howled across the pass, and Clara thought she'd never felt further from civilization, more exposed to the elements' indifference. But she also felt Gavin's heart beating steady against her back, felt his arm solid around her, and somehow that made the cold bearable. We're going to make it, she whispered into the darkness. Damn right we are. His voice was fierce. Didn't come this far to lose you now. They slept fitfully, waking often to the wind's howling or a horse's nervous whinny, or simply the brutal cold that seemed to seep into bones and freeze marrow. Clara woke before dawn, her side burning, her whole body aching, to find Gavin already awake and watching the eastern sky. Snow coming, he said quietly. See that band of clouds? They'll be here by afternoon. Will we be off the mountain by then? If we move fast and nothing goes wrong. He looked at her, his expression grim in the pre-dawn light. How's your side? Been better, but I can ride. Clara, I can ride, Gavin. We don't have a choice. She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the way her wound protested. Let's get moving before that weather hits. They broke camp in the darkness, everyone moving with silent urgency. The eastern descent was indeed worse than the climb, steeper, icier, with the added burden of fighting gravity instead of working with it. The horses had to be led rather than ridden for the first hour, their hooves seeking purchase on the treacherous slope. Clara's legs shook with fatigue by the time the trail widened enough to remount. Her wound was definitely bleeding again. She could feel the blood tacky against her skin, soaking through the bandages. But they were making good time, the elevation dropping steadily, and she clamped her teeth together and endured. Around mid-morning, the first snowflakes began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle snowfall became a driving storm. Wind shrieked down the mountainside, hurling snow horizontally, turning the world into a whiteout that swallowed visibility beyond a few feet. The horses balked, terrified, and the men had to dismount again, leading their animals by feel and faith more than sight. Clara couldn't feel her fingers anymore. The cold had moved past pain into numbness, and she stumbled more than walked, one hand gripping Copper's reins, the other pressed to her bleeding side. Somewhere ahead, she could hear Gavin calling back instructions, his voice nearly lost in the wind's fury. Stay on the trail. Feel for the rock wall on your left. Don't drift right. Because drifting right meant the drop, invisible now in the blizzard but no less deadly. Claire kept her left shoulder brushing the mountain wall, trusting touch over sight, praying that Copper's instincts would keep them both from stepping into empty air. Time lost meaning. They struggled downward through the whiteout, each step a negotiation with death. Clara's wound reopened further. She could feel hot blood mixing with freezing snow, her strength bleeding away with it. Her vision narrowed, darkness creeping in at the edges. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again, strong hands grabbed her. I've got you. Gavin's voice, close and urgent. Stay with me, Clara. Just a little further. Can't. Her voice was a rasp. Too cold. Too tired. The hell you can't. He pulled her against him, one arm around her waist, taking her weight. You survived being shot, survived the fever, survived that damn pass. You're not dying in a snowstorm 50 feet from safety. Safety. Cave. Webb found it. Come on. He half carried, half dragged her forward. Clara tried to help, tried to move her legs, but they felt distant and unresponsive. The cold had its claws in her now, and some part of her wanted to simply stop, to lie down in the snow and rest. Then they were out of the wind in sudden relative warmth that shocked her system. A cave. Small, but deep enough to shelter them and the horses. The other men were already inside, beating snow from their clothes, tending their animals. Someone had managed to start a small fire with dry wood found in the back of the cave. Gavin laid Clara down near the fire and immediately started removing her wet outer layers. His face was grim, his hands shaking, from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. How bad? Hawkins appeared beside them. Bad. Wounds reopened, she's hypothermic, and we're stuck in this cave until the storm passes. Gavin's voice was tight with controlled panic. I need dry cloth, hot water, and every blanket we've got. The men moved with urgent efficiency. Within minutes, Clara was stripped of her wet clothes and wrapped in dry blankets, her wound exposed to Gavin's expert assessment. It looked worse than it was, he assured her, bleeding heavily but not catastrophically. The cold had actually slowed the blood loss. This is going to hurt, he warned, and then pressed heated cloth to the wound. Clara screamed, the pain shocking her back to full consciousness. Her body convulsed, and Gavin held her down with one hand while working with the other. I know it hurts, but I have to clean it, have to stop the bleeding. His voice was steady, despite his shaking hands. Stay with me, Clara. Keep fighting. She fought. Through the agony of Gavin cleaning the wound, through the burning torture of his grandmother's salve, through the tight binding of fresh bandages. She fought to stay conscious, to keep breathing, to prove that she could survive this too. By the time he finished, she was sobbing with pain and exhaustion. Gavin pulled her against his chest, wrapped his arms around her, and just held her while she shook. "You're okay. You're going to be okay." He repeated it like a mantra. "The worst is over." "Promise?" Her voice was a broken whisper. "Promise." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "I won't lose you now. Not after everything." The storm raged outside for the rest of that day and through the night. They took turns tending the fire, keeping watch, caring for the horses. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, feverish despite the cold, while Gavin maintained his vigil beside her. Every time she woke, he was there, cooling her brow with snowmelt when fever spiked, warming her with his body when she shivered, talking to her about anything and everything to keep her focused on staying alive. "Tell me about your ranch," she whispered during one lucid moment. "It's nothing fancy, 100 acres in a valley, good grass for horses, a creek that runs year-round." His voice was soft, meant only for her. "Built the cabin myself, every log and nail. It's quiet there. Peaceful. Sounds lonely." It was. His hand found hers under the blankets. "But I was thinking, if you're serious about that fresh start you mentioned, the cabin could use a woman's touch. And the horses need someone better at naming them than me." Despite her pain, Clara managed a weak smile. "What do you name them?" "Horse 1, Horse 2, etc." He smiled back. "See? Terrible." "Terrible," she agreed. Then more seriously, "You mean it? About the ranch?" "I mean it." His gray eyes were steady. "If you'll have me, and the solitude and the hard winters and everything that comes with frontier life, I'm asking you to stay, permanently." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Gavin Callahan, are you proposing to me while I'm half dead in a cave?" Seemed like as good a time as any. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Plus, if you say no, I can blame it on the fever and pretend it never happened." "I'm not saying no." Her grip tightened on his hand. "I'm saying yes. To the ranch, to the horses with terrible names, to you. Yes to all of it." "Yeah?" His voice cracked slightly. "Yeah." She pulled his hand to her lips, kissed his scarred knuckles. "But I'm holding you to this once I'm better. No backing out because you got scared." "I'm terrified," he admitted, "but of losing you, not of keeping you." They stayed like that, hands clasped, while the storm howled and the fire crackled and the other men pretended not to hear the quiet promises being made in the cave's shadows. By morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the world buried in white silence. They dug out of the cave into brilliant sunshine that reflected off fresh snow with blinding intensity. The trail below was visible again, and crucially, they descended far enough that the snow was passable rather than deadly. Clara was weak but lucid, her fever broken, her wound painful but not catastrophically so. Gavin helped her dress, supporting her when her legs threatened to give out, and she saw the relief in his face when she managed to stand on her own. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can ride." She took a step, swayed, steadied. "Might need help mounting, but I can ride." They made it down the mountain that day, slowly but steadily. The eastern slope was less treacherous than the western approach, and the storm had blown through rather than settling in. By late afternoon, they'd descended below the snow line. By evening, they'd reached the foothills where green returned to the world. Fort Russell appeared on the horizon 2 days later, a welcome cluster of buildings and American flags, civilization and safety after the mountain's harsh isolation. They rode through the gates with Clara swaying in her saddle, but still mounted, still alive, still determined. The fort's commander listened to Marshal Hawkins' report with increasing outrage, then immediately dispatched a telegram to Cheyenne. Within hours, territorial officials were making arrangements to transport Clara safely to the capital for her testimony. "You'll be protected every step," the commander assured her. "Armed escort, secure lodging, everything you need." Clara nodded, but her eyes sought Gavin. He stood near the door, looking uncomfortable in the fort's formal surroundings, clearly ready to leave civilization behind again. "I'd like Mr. Callahan to be part of my security detail," she said. "I trust him with my life, literally." "Of course." The commander glanced at Gavin. "Mr. Callahan, we'd be honored to have your assistance." They reached Cheyenne 3 days later, and Clara's arrival caused the sensation Hawkins had hoped for. The woman everyone thought was dead, walking into the territorial courthouse very much alive, with documented testimony about a prominent banker's crimes. It was frontier justice at its most dramatic. Edward Palmer was arrested within hours, his confident smile finally cracking when Clara walked into the marshal's office. She'd never forget the look on his face, shock, fury, fear, all cycling through in the space of a heartbeat. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered. "I was supposed to be a lot of things." Clara's voice was steady, cold. "Convenient, quiet, obedient. But I survived, Edward, and now you're going to pay for what you did." The trial took 3 weeks. Clara testified for 2 full days, laying out Palmer's embezzlement scheme in exhaustive detail. Thomas Winters corroborated her story, and federal investigators found the false accounts, the fraudulent transactions, the paper trail Palmer had thought he'd destroyed. The Blackwell gang members who'd been captured testified that Palmer had hired them, had ordered the robbery, had specifically told them to kill Clara Nelson if they found her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Edward Palmer was convicted of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges that added up to a death sentence. He was hanged 2 weeks later in the territorial prison yard, proclaiming his innocence to the end, but nobody believed him. Clara watched the execution from a distance, Gavin standing solid beside her. She'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she just felt tired. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back Milton Reed or the others Palmer had killed. It couldn't return the money he'd stolen or heal the trauma he'd caused. "It's over," Gavin said quietly. "You did it. You brought him down." "We did it." Clara turned to face him. "I couldn't have survived without you." Probably true. His smile was slight but genuine. "So what now? You're a hero, Clara. Territorial officials are offering you positions. Banks in Cheyenne want to hire you. You could have any life you want here." "I could." She looked at the city spreading around them, bigger than Redemption Creek, more opportunities, more connections. Then she looked at Gavin, at his weathered face and steady eyes, and the quiet strength that had carried her through hell. "Or I could have the life I actually want, with you, at a ranch with terrible horse names." "You sure? Cheyenne's got culture, society, indoor plumbing. Cheyenne's got noise and crowds and too many memories of almost dying." Clara took his hand. "Your ranch has peace, and you. That's all I need." Gavin pulled her close, right there on the street with half of Cheyenne watching, and kissed her like a promise. When they broke apart, his voice was rough with emotion. "Marry me properly. Not in a cave while you're half dead, but here, now, while we're both alive and whole." "Yes." Clara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony with Marshal Hawkins and his wife as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress purchased with reward money from Palmer's capture. Gavin wore his only suit, uncomfortable but determined. The judge who'd overseen Palmer's trial performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt something in her chest that had been clenched for months finally relax. They left Cheyenne the next morning, riding west toward the mountains with everything they owned packed on 2 horses. The territorial government had returned the money Palmer stole, distributing it to the depositors he'd robbed. Clara's testimony had saved dozens of families from ruin, had brought down a corrupt man, had changed territorial banking regulations. She'd done what she set out to do. Now she was going home. The journey back to Gavin's ranch took a week, leisurely this time, avoiding Coleman's Pass in favor of lower, safer routes. They camped under stars, cooked over open fires, talked about everything and nothing. Gavin taught Clara to track deer. Clara taught Gavin to read poetry she'd brought from Cheyenne. They learned each other slowly, without crisis forcing intimacy, and discovered they still fit together even in peace. The ranch appeared finally as they crested a familiar ridge, the cabin in its valley, the horses grazing peacefully, smoke rising from the chimney where they'd arranged for Hank to maintain things in their absence. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," Gavin said softly. Clara looked at the cabin, at the mountains rising beyond it, at the endless sky stretching overhead. It was isolated, challenging, far from anything resembling civilization, It was perfect. Home, she agreed. Finally. That first winter was hard. Clara learned frontier ranching the way she'd learned everything else, through determination and occasional failure and Gavin's patient instruction. She discovered she had a talent for working with the horses, especially the younger ones who responded to her calm confidence. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to preserve food for winter, to read weather patterns and plan accordingly. The nights were long and cold, but they had each other. They'd sit by the fire while Gavin carved and Clara read aloud, or they'd simply talk, sharing stories from their separate pasts, building a shared future. When nightmares woke Gavin, and they sometimes did, Clara was there to pull him back from whatever battlefield haunted him. When Clara's side ached on cold days, Gavin would warm his grandmother's salve and tend the scar with gentle hands. Spring brought new life to the ranch. 3 mares foaled, and Clara was there for each birth, helping Gavin when complications arose, laughing with delight when the wobbly-legged colts finally stood. She named them properly, Starlight and Thunder and Wind That Runs, much to Gavin's amusement. "See?" Clara said, watching the foals nurse. "Much better than Horse 1. "Have to admit, you might be right about that." Gavin pulled her against his side. "You're good at this. Better than I expected." "Because I'm a city girl who shouldn't know about ranching." She elbowed him gently. "Because you're smart enough to learn fast and stubborn enough to keep trying when it's hard." He kissed the top of her head. "Same qualities that kept you alive when Palmer tried to kill you." Clara thought about that night, running through the forest, bleeding and terrified, certain she was dying. It felt like something that had happened to a different person, in a different life. That woman had been alone, afraid, running from danger. This woman had a home, a partner, a purpose. She was running toward things now instead of away. Summer brought visitors. Marshall Hawkins and his wife came for a week, along with Hank Ridley and some of the other men who'd helped them through Coleman's Pass. They celebrated properly, with music and dancing and too much whiskey, and shared stories about the trial, about Palmer's execution, about the changes sweeping through territorial banking after the scandal. "You changed things, Clara," Hawkins told her one evening. "Banks across the territory are reforming their practices, hiring auditors, implementing oversight. What you did, it mattered." "People died," Clara said quietly. "Milton Reed and the others. And their deaths would have meant nothing if you hadn't survived to bring Palmer to justice." The marshal's voice was firm. "You honored them. Remember that." She did remember. Every morning when she woke beside Gavin, every time she helped with the horses, every quiet evening by the fire, she remembered that she was alive because she'd fought to be, and that her survival had meaning beyond herself. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life. Clara and Gavin built something solid together, a true partnership where her skills with numbers and planning complemented his knowledge of land and animals. The ranch prospered, became known for quality horses. Word spread about the woman who'd brought down the corrupt banker, and sometimes people would ride out just to see her, to hear the story firsthand. Clara would tell it, but always emphasizing the others who'd helped. Gavin who'd saved her, Hawkins who'd believed her, the men who'd risked Coleman's Pass. She'd become part of local legend, but she wore it lightly, more interested in the life she was building than the reputation she'd earned. 3 years after Palmer's execution, on a spring morning bright with promise, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Gavin that evening, watching his face cycle through shock, joy, and terror in rapid succession. "A baby?" he whispered. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure." She took his hands. "I know it's frightening. Terrifying," he corrected. "But also," his voice caught, "also the best news I've ever heard." Their daughter was born in January during a snowstorm that reminded them both uncomfortably of the blizzard on Coleman's Pass. But this time they were in the cabin, warm and safe, with the fort's doctor in attendance and everything going smoothly. When Clara held her daughter for the first time, she understood finally what she'd been fighting for all those years ago. Not just survival, not just justice, but this chance at a future, at family, at love that built something lasting. They named her Sarah after Gavin's grandmother. She had Clara's green eyes and Gavin's dark hair, and from her first day she seemed completely unintimidated by the world. She grew up on the ranch, learning to ride before she could run properly, fearless with the horses and endlessly curious about everything. When Sarah was 5, sitting on the porch watching her father work with a new colt, she asked Clara the question that had been inevitable. "Mama, why do you have that scar on your side?" Clara looked at her daughter's innocent face, then at Gavin across the yard, then at the mountains rising beyond them. So many ways to answer, so much pain in the truth, but also so much triumph. "That scar is from a time when I had to be very brave," Clara said finally, "when I had to run and fight and refuse to give up, even when everything was scary and hard." "Did you win?" Clara thought about Palmer hanging, about justice served, about the life she'd built from the ashes of that terror. She thought about this ranch, this family, this peace she'd fought so hard to claim. "Yes, sweetheart, I won." "Good." Sarah nodded with a child's simple acceptance. Then she pointed at her father. "Papa says you're the bravest person he knows." "Your papa might be biased," Clara smiled, "but he's also right." That evening, after Sarah was asleep and the horses were settled and the stars wheeled overhead, Clara and Gavin sat on the porch as they did most nights. He had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth, and everything was quiet except for the wind through the pines. "Do you ever regret it?" Gavin asked softly. "Giving up the city, the opportunities, everything you could have had?" Clara thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I wonder what that life would have been like, but I've never regretted choosing this one, choosing you. Even when winter's brutal and the nearest neighbor is 10 miles away and you're covered in horse manure, even then." She turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her in every way that mattered. "You asked me once, in that cave, to stay with you. I'm still saying yes, Gavin. Every day, I'm choosing yes." His arm tightened around her. "Always?" "Always." The word hung in the air between them, the same promise they'd made to each other in darkness, in terror, and hope. It had carried them through mountains and trials and all the complicated years that followed. It would carry them forward still, through whatever came next. Because Clara Nelson Callahan had learned something essential in that forest when she'd been running for her life, something that had sustained her through everything since. Sometimes surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight for the right to truly live, to love, to build something that matters. She'd fought. She'd survived. She'd won. And every morning when she woke to Wyoming sunlight and Gavin's steady breathing and the sounds of horses in the valley, she won again. The cowboy had held a wet cloth to her brow once, whispering, "Stay with me," over and over, through a feverish night. She'd stayed. And in staying, she'd found everything worth living for. Years would pass. More children, more seasons, the inevitable challenges and joys that filled any life lived fully. They would weather droughts and harsh winters, celebrate victories and mourn losses. The ranch would grow and prosper. Sarah would grow up strong and brave, and eventually she'd tell her own children about the grandmother who'd once been a bank teller brave enough to stand against corruption. But always, in the quiet moments, Clara and Gavin would find each other. In the evening on the porch, or working side by side with the horses, or simply meeting each other's eyes across a room. And in those moments, the promise they'd made would echo between them, as true and essential as breath. Stay with me. Always. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to everything they'd endured and everything they'd built. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and grass and home. And two people who'd both been lost once, separately, lived now as one, proof that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most precious destinations. The story that had begun with terror in a bank, with bullets and blood and desperate flight through darkness, ended here in peace. Not a simple peace, never easy, but earned and cherished and absolutely real. Clara Nelson had run for her life once. Now she lived it, fully and without apology, in the shadow of the mountains with the man who'd whispered her back from death's edge. And that, after everything, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.